your age, and where you're coming in from. Always cool to see some of the same faces joining every single session. I'm here with Coach John Tibbetts. Coach, how are we doing today?
Great. How are you guys?
Oh, just living the dream, baby. I'm going to level up that game, level up that lacrosse goalie game. We're going to be talking about strength and conditioning in this topic or in this presentation. So I'm pumped for this one. Before we get to it, let me announce the sponsors. So if you guys, hopefully you know all of the sponsors by now. Let me go ahead and just do a quick screen share. Deny Goalkeeping, Guardian Gear, Lax Shield, Deep South Lacrosse, and the CL Ace. That head's coming later this year. Warrior has donated a bunch of NEMI heads and NEMI QS gloves. ECD has donated a bunch of impacts. Nutty Buddy has donated a bunch of cups, athletic cups. And we've got String King all sponsoring the event. Huge shout out to those sponsors. Thank you so much for hooking up us, the goalie community. How do you enter the giveaways? 3-step process. I think we got some folks from Team Lax Goalie Rat working behind the scenes. I forgot to see who's. We got Armand and Lauren working behind the scenes. If you guys could drop in the chat the 3 steps to win the prizes, so everyone knows. Here it is. You take a selfie of yourself watching the event, because Coach John and I, you get to see us. We do not get to see you. And guess what? We love to see who's on the other end of this training. That's step number 1. Step number 2, post that to social media and tag myself, and you can tag Coach John. We'll drop your Instagram in the chat as well. And then step 3, email help@laxgoalierat.com and just say I posted. Okay, and that gets you entered into the drawings. You can enter once per session, so 4 times per day. And then in the morning, I do the drawings for the giveaways. If you win, I'll contact you. Okay, you will know if you have won. We'll reach out. I think that is it. Oh, if you don't have the social media, just email the photo in step number 3, help@laxgoalierat.com. All right, VIP Pass is still available if you want to get lifetime access to all these replays, all 20 sessions. Earlier today, someone asked a question, and I went back and I rewatched the Drake Porter and brought up the exact moment that answered that question, and we rewatched it together. That's kind of the power of the VIP Pass. You can go back at any time and rewatch these sessions, and you always get like 2 or 3 things that you missed the first time. So that's at laxgoalierat.com/VIP. 20 coaching sessions, amazing value. There are free replays. So if you want to go back and watch a session from today, 24-hour replays, you can do that. Replays.goaliesummit.com. All right. I think that's all the announcements I have. Oh, there is a Q&A box. So if you got questions while Coach John is going through the presentation, drop them in the Q&A box. Sometimes the chat goes pretty quick and I miss the questions. So questions go in the Q&A box. And Coach, let me turn it over to you. I'm pumped up.
All right. Sweet. We'll go ahead, share the screen here. Let me know if you can see it. Share. Boom. All right. All good?
I think so. Can you guys see that? Let me know in the chat. I think we got some yeses. All right. We're good.
Awesome.
We're good. Let's do it. Yep.
All right. Well, starting out, my name is John Tibbetts. I'm a certified strength and conditioning specialist through the NSCA. Super excited to be talking with you guys today. Sports performance training and, playing lacrosse goalie and lacrosse goalie are 2 worlds that I'm very involved in. So I'm super excited to kind of merge the 2 here together. There's not a lot of people talking about both those worlds in conjunction. So thank you, Coach Damon, for having me on today. I know a lot of the presenters are talking about, positioning in the cage, how a goalie session should look like practice-wise, but my presentation is all about the role of strength and conditioning in improving goalie performance. So got a lot of cool topics to talk to you guys about today, so I'm excited to get started. A little bit about me. I grew up playing lacrosse back in Wisconsin. Started when I was in about 4th grade, picked up the sport from my older brother, fell in love with it, came out to GCU, Grand Canyon University in Phoenix, Arizona to play MCLA Division I, where I graduated with a degree in exercise science. Following my playing career, I actually joined on as the head goalie coach, the defensive coordinator, and then the leader of the strength and conditioning weight room element for the team. So was super excited to be able to carry on there. I also coach various goalies, various age groups across the valley here in Phoenix. So I continue to train goalies pretty much every day. So goals of the presentation, number one, I just want to give goalies a better understanding of training in the weight room and the benefits that it provides. So I know a lot of incoming freshmen in the GCU, especially some of the goalies last year, they didn't really understand why they had to work out just like every other player on the field. And just like every other player, we have, demands of the position that we have to train for, whether that be mobility, strength, power, and whatnot. So want to give you guys a good understanding of why we should train certain elements within the weight room. And then I want to also provide some insight on how to structure training sessions within the weight room. So it can be very overwhelming just as a general person knowing what to do in the weight room, but when you're taking it a step further and getting ready, for a competition, that adds an extra element. So figuring out how to structure and kind of plan out a training program is super important. And then number three, this is my overall goal of the presentation, because goalie is such a niche position and already, not a well-known sport across the country. I know a lot of people coming from the East Coast, you're probably like, it's not well known. Well, back in Wisconsin, where I'm from, or out here in Phoenix, it's still kind of gaining its roots. So I want to provide resources for players, parents, coaches on proper goalie training in the weight room. So you can take away elements of this and be able to train the kids that you have, or, kids that you coach.
Before we get going, let's just, I want to see in the chat if anybody is in the weight room already.
Yeah, let's see that.
Yeah. Or is anybody not in the weight room? Kinda from Jake. I love lifting, Colin. So a lot of people are kind of at a kinda. I'm trying, says Ian. All right, Ian, after this presentation, you're going to be all set. So there you go. 3 to 4 days a week from Austin, starting to, says James. So Coach, we got a bunch of different levels. How about, is anybody, there's a couple, not really, from Becky. So there are a few not in the weight room yet. So, all right, cool.
Yeah, well, hopefully this can change your mind and get you in there.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it's great to hear that there's a lot of people in the chat that have already started. So hopefully, you can build off what you've already been doing and add some of the elements I'm going to be talking about today. So just as an intro to strength and conditioning, here's a nice little throwback picture from COVID year of college in the weight room. I think this was my junior year. But so strength and conditioning just operates off the SAID principle. So SAID, that is specific adaptations to imposed demands. So when it translates to goalie training, there's a lot of demands that we have as athletes within the cage to perform in our competition. So with strength and conditioning, we're placing specific demands on the body to drive adaptations that we will use when it comes to performance in the cage. So moving on from that, the role of strength and conditioning with goalies, these are going to be the major kind of bullet point outlines of the presentation. So number one is injury prevention. Number two is going to be mobility, which is very important for goalies, strength, and then we have power to kind of wrap it up. And power isn't on all caps, because once you have a good baseline of mobility and strength, what really is going to drive performance in the cage and get that save percentage up, besides your skill work and skill work on the field, is going to be training for power and training to be as explosive as we can. All right, so let's start out with injury prevention. So obviously we know there's injuries that we sustain as goalies, broken thumbs, big bruises on the thighs, shins, or whatever, but there's various injuries that we can train to prevent in the weight room. So most common areas of injury for lacrosse players and goalies alike are going to be knee injuries, hamstring injuries, groin injuries, ankle injuries, and then of course concussions. So with each of these, we'll talk about why you will see these injuries be so prevalent in the sport of lacrosse, and then how we can prevent those injuries within the weight room. So starting off with knee injuries, most commonly what you'll see, especially in female athletes, would be ACL tears. You can also sustain meniscus tears, MCL tears, and then there's patellar tendonitis, which is another kind of knee injury. That's something I dealt with in my playing career at GCU. So looking at why they happen, most often what you'll see with knee injuries is that there is just a lack of strength and stability of the muscle surrounding the knee joint. So the two muscle groups that you want to focus on primarily is going to be the quadriceps and the hamstrings. So pictured here, another throwback picture from the days at GCU, we have a squat. That's a great lower body fundamental exercise that you should incorporate in the weight room. So get the movement pattern down of the squat and then add some external load to that. That's going to really target the quadriceps specifically, as well as the hamstrings and glutes. But to take it a step further, since we know that instability contributes to a lot of injuries such as ACL injuries or meniscus tears, we want to add a degree of instability so we can drive the adaptation of stability. So once you get the movement pattern down of a squat, you want to move that into a unilateral or single leg variation of the movement. So taking it a step further from the squat, we want to be able to kick our leg back and perform a split squat. So that is, again, going to add a degree of instability within the exercise so we can add that adaptation of being more stable with that joint. So split squats are a great exercise for preventing knee injuries. You can take it a step further once you get the form down with that, and you can use adequate weight. Go ahead and put your foot up on a box or some sort of implement so your rear foot is elevated, and that's going to further, increase that level of instability for the exercise so we can drive the adaptation of being more stable. So with knee tendonitis specifically, there's a couple great exercises that I like to include for athletes that are, experiencing this sort of pain. Number one is going to be a pin squat, also called an Anderson squat. And what this is going to do is it's going to remove that further lowering portion of the squat movement where you're most commonly going to experience that tendon pain in the patellar tendon in front of the knee. So you want to set this exercise up by putting the safety rails up at about a quarter squat position. And then from here, you're still performing that concentric or shortening motion of the quadricep muscles while getting that strength benefit, but you're not further irritating that injury, further irritating that knee with that deep squat pattern. Moving on from
that's cool. Real quick on that one, do you rest the weight on the bar on the things and then go again, or do I just kind of go to that level and go up?
So for this, you'll start on the safety pins here.
Yeah.
So you'll start in this position, and what you want to do is maintain tension at the start, right? Because if we have the bar resting here, most commonly what you'll see is people kind of move it up with their back first and then push up with their legs. So you want to start, fully tensioned. So driving the elbows down, creating that nice shelf for the bar to sit on, and then be able to squeeze the core from this beginning position. And then that second picture, that's when you're going to end up right here.
Yeah. And that helps if you got the bad knees. So you don't have to go all the way down.
Yep, 100%. So this is something I recommend in conjunction with what I'm going to talk about in a second here, which is yielding isometrics. So I put these two exercises in for a couple of our guys at GCU this past season who were experiencing really bad tendonitis. One of them, he was riding rodeo at the same time we had our season, so his knees were all kind of jacked up from riding horses and whatnot. So in the addition of pin squats, you'll want to add in yielding isometrics, which is basically either trying to hold your body weight at a certain position, or you can use it weighted just like this guy is. So he is in a split squat variation and his knee is just hovering just above the ground right here. So if you hold this position for anywhere between 10 and 30 seconds, that's going to lessen the irritation of that tendon. It's actually going to build up strength within that tendon by making it stiffer. And it's also going to strengthen up the stabilizing muscles for the knee joint, which is the quadriceps and the hamstrings. So my recommendation with these two exercises is with the pin squat, you can add quite a bit of weight to this because you're taking down that lowering portion. So we're getting more external load through that concentric movement. So you'll perform this movement for about 3 to 6 reps, and then you'll want to perform this movement for 10 to 30 seconds on each leg. So that's how I pair these two up together in a session. And if this is still difficult for you for a balance issue, you can always opt in wall sits. Those are probably the most common yielding isometric you'll see. All right, moving on, hamstring injuries. So the most common injury you'll see with the hamstrings is a pulled hamstring, most likely to the bicep femoris. So The hamstrings are the muscles that are in the back of your leg, the posterior portion of the body. And a lot of times the hamstrings just can't handle the end range of motion that they're being placed in, especially if you're making a save and you're kind of in an awkward position. If you're not mobile enough to get in that position, that's when you're going to kind of see that muscle pull happen or that muscle strain. But another reason they happen is due to the fact that we are so explosive in the cage. Sometimes our muscles cannot handle that force being placed upon it and doesn't have the level of the strength to maintain its position as it's being lengthened. So if you can imagine you're a righty goalie and you're making a stick side save to this side, you're stepping with your right foot, but your left leg is being extended rapidly to extend and drive towards that shot. So the hamstrings are actually contracting while that leg is being extended, but they're being contracted as they're lengthening. So that's what we call an eccentric contraction. So you can imagine when you're stepping to make a quick save, that muscle is going from, its resting position to a very stretched position in a quick period of time. So if you can't handle the force that is being placed upon that muscle in that eccentric contraction, that's when you're going to experience that muscle strain as well. So my number one exercise for the hamstrings is going to be a Nordic hamstring curl. And I like this exercise because it replicates that eccentric, that stretching contraction of the hamstring muscle. So to perform this movement, you'll anchor your ankles and your feet. Most likely you will not have one of these Nordic hamstring machines. I've only seen them once before. So you can just have a partner hold your ankles down or put your feet under some heavy dumbbells, and that's going to keep you mounted to the ground. So with this, you're just going to lower hips first down to the ground. And again, his hamstrings are eccentrically contracting in order to slow down that movement. If that movement's too difficult, you can opt for a physio ball hamstring curl. So you'll set up with your hips up in the air, your calves on a physio ball, and you're just going to simply curl the ball towards you. And then we're getting that eccentric contraction as that ball rolls back out to the starting position. So if you're also rehabbing a pulled hamstring muscle, this is a great exercise to put in for the Nordic curls because it is a little less demanding than the Nordic curl. And then pictured on the right is what's called a hamstring tantrum with a physio ball. So the word tantrum comes from the fact that you're quite literally just smacking your legs on the ball as quickly as possible. So if you can imagine like a little kid having a tantrum, they, flail their limbs everywhere and just kind of slam it. That's what you're doing into the ball with your feet. So see here, her hips are elevated and she is striking the physio ball with the bottoms of her feet. Now that left leg is going through the concentric contraction of the hamstring, so it's getting shorter. But what we want to focus on is that opposite leg, because that opposite leg is going through that active deceleration of knee extension. So that hamstring is fighting that resistance to extend the knee, and it has to contract as it lengthens very quickly. So that's going to be another great inclusion in your training program.
Oh, that's cool. Is that and the movement is at the knee, like you're just bending at your knee, like pop, 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 pop?
Yep, exactly. So you're just going like this very quickly in that tantrum fashion. So you can either set up, I've seen this done either laying on the ground, or you can go in a prone position. So being on your stomach and someone holds the ball right on top of your hamstring. So you kind of kick backwards into it.
I see.
This one adds kind of a level of stability too, because you can kick on the side and the ball can move a little bit. But yeah, so you're just kicking into that ball as quickly as possible.
Cool.
All right. Next up is a groin injury. So most commonly what you'll see is the adductor longus muscle being pulled. So the adductor longus it originates in the pubic bone, so right up in the groin region, and actually goes all the way down the medial portion or the inner portion of the thigh. And much like the hamstrings, when you do step towards a shot, again, we're going stick side, much like this goalie here, he's stepping with his right foot and that back leg is extending very rapidly in a very short amount of time. So much like the hamstrings having to contract and lengthen to slow down knee extension, the adductor longus is eccentrically contracting here to try to fight that leg being abducted or pushed further away from the body. So much like the hamstring, it starts in a rested state and then it is lengthened very quickly. So again, if you can't handle that end range of motion, you don't have the mobility to get in that end range of motion or the strength to be able to handle that muscle contraction, that's when you're going to see a muscle strain develop in the groin. So looking at what can be done to prevent it, number one, just being able to keep the hips mobile, which we'll go into further into the presentation. And two, just being able to be strong in that end range of motion is really going to help us out. So exercises like a lateral lunge are going to be key here because we're replicating that back leg kind of kicking out beside us and getting that long stretch in the adductor. You can perform this in a more dynamic fashion where you are going down quickly and then having to drive yourself back up. That's going to replicate more of a power movement within the cage. And then we have the option to perform adductor holds, which are a sort of side plank variation, but the stress is being placed on that adductor muscle. So typically you'll start with the picture on the right, this setup where his knee is supporting him on the bench as well. So that's shortening the lever between the muscles, so it's a little bit easier to perform. So you're just going to set up like a normal side plank, but instead of having your feet on the ground, you're actually going to be resting with your knee up on your side here. If this is too easy, once you can get about 30 seconds straight of a hold with the picture on the right, you can opt for the harder version, which is again a longer lever because it's a foot supporting ourselves on the bench here. And you can progress this movement as well by adding a plate to the side of the hip or a chain. But again, once you get about 30 seconds with the movement on the right, then you can progress it to the one on the left, which is a little bit more difficult.
Nice. And that's going to work the groin.
Yep. So it's going to work I'll go back to that. Yep. It's just going to work all the muscles on the inner thigh. And I mean, after this presentation, or if you want to try it out right now, like if you have a chair or something, try to replicate this movement and see if you can keep a straight line between the ankles, knees, hips, and shoulders, because it's quite more difficult than it looks in the pictures for sure. It looks super simple, but it gives you a good burn.
All right. If someone enters the giveaways with a picture of themselves doing this particular movement right here, we're going to give you 3 entries. That's worth 3 entries.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, and if you can hold it for 30 seconds, man, I'll buy you something for sure, because it's quite difficult, but another great exercise for the groin for sure.
I love it.
All right. And then second to last injury we'll talk about is ankle injuries. So most commonly what you'll see is just a low grade ankle sprain, which could occur to either the medial inside ligament or the lateral outside ligament here. And much like all the other injuries, mobility plays a huge role in this. So if you have very stiff ankles and you get into a, crazy position where that knee is coming close to the toes and you're not able to handle that end range of motion, that's when you can see a ligament strain. But stability and strength with the lower body also plays an important role in stabilizing that ankle joint as we go to make saves. So if that ankle is not stable, the hips aren't stable, that's going to lead to some of those ankle sprains, like I mentioned previously. So some great exercises for that. Again, any sort of lunge variation is going to work on that ankle flexion in the end range of motion. And so lateral lunge, forward lunges are great options for that. And then another reason why ankle injuries happen at such a high rate, especially in explosive sports such as basketball, such as lacrosse, is due to a phenomenon called ground reaction forces. So whenever you go and make a save and you're stepping out in a quick, powerful motion, let's say, again, this goalie stepping with her left foot here, the amount of force that you're putting into the ground is coming back up to your body through the ground. So there's equal force coming from the ground that you had placed on the ground before. So if you can't tolerate those ground reaction forces and your tendons within your ankle, such as your Achilles, aren't accustomed to that force, then that's when you can, have a ankle sprain, or you can end up injuring that Achilles, which is not fun at all. So focusing on movements such as plyometrics are going to be key to building up tolerance to ground reaction forces. I know as goalies, a big thing is jump roping. So that's a great option. You can also perform the same motion as you are in a jump rope called a pogo hop, where you're jumping with the ankles down the turf. That's going to build up that ground contact time and build up your tolerance to those forces being placed on the ankle from the ground.
Say that last one. What's the pogo hop? I wasn't. So you're doing the jump rope.
Yeah, so pogo hop, it's the same movement pattern that you would be going about in a jump rope. So you're not really exploding with the ankles and knees, more or less you're using the ankle joint to explode up off the ground. So it's a similar movement pattern as the jump rope, but take away the jump rope and perform that same motion, but you're just moving down the turf.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
And those are also a great inclusion. You can start with the pogo hops and go into, a more demanding exercise such as jumping over hurdles. So you're getting higher off the ground, so you have to come down further, and there's more force placed on the ground, which means more force coming back up through the ankle.
Cool.
All right. So final note, we have concussion. So I know this is a very major injury. I sustained a couple of these at GCU and then in high school as well. So there is actually a way we can not really prevent injuries, right? No injury is 100% preventable. There are a lot of external factors that play a role, even if we are as prepared in the weight room as we can be. There's a lot of different factors that play a role into it. So one factor in concussions that we can actually use to reduce the occurrence rate of concussions is strengthening the neck muscles. So research suggests that for every 1 pound an increase in neck strength, there's a 5% reduction in concussion rate. So meaning if we strengthen the neck muscles, we can more or less, kind of lessen the incident rate of concussions. So besides having the fancy neck strengthening machines that a lot of like MMA or boxers have, there are some like body weight exercises that you can include in order to increase neck strength. The first one's going to be a neck plank. Now, this is kind of an advanced variation of neck training. I would recommend this for like university or late high school athletes. So instead of supporting yourself with your hands for your upper body, you're actually going to be placing the load on your forehead. I recommend starting out with a knee plank for this variation because this can be very stressful on the neck if you're just jumping right into the full plank. But the exercise that would be probably easier for most people to perform, especially in larger group settings, is just going to be a partner assisted neck exercise. So we see that pictured down below with the Villanova strength coaches here. You have a partner set up on a bench with their chest on the bench and their head is going to be hanging off of it. And you're going to provide resistance to either the back of the head or the forehead while they make a yes motion with their head. So you'll do that for about 10 to 15 reps. I know at GCU, we included this as part of our warm-up every day for our training program. So we're kind of minimally dosing the neck to not, strain any of the muscles or kind of impact our performance on the field. But this is a, little exercise. Any benefit that we can get out of training, we want to, incorporate that. So if we can lessen the incident rate of, 1 concussion out of 100 kids doing this type of training, then, we'll see benefit in that.
All right. That's good. Train the neck, yo.
Yep.
I wrestled in high school and we did so much like neck bridges like that. Even like reverse where our back was kind of facing the ground and like you kind of get your ear down to one side and ear down to the other side.
Yeah. So with that exercise too, you don't have to stick to, your chest down. You could go on your back, have resistance from the forehead, or you can sit on the side of the bench and kind of hit all, planes of motion with the neck muscles.
Love it.
Sweet. So moving on to mobility, this is a major part of training to be a goalie. Obviously, we know as goalies, we get in some pretty awkward positions throughout the game or in practice. So we have to be strong through those, crazy ranges of motion that we find ourselves into. So we see the Johns Hopkins goalie here. He's in a full split. So obviously, I don't expect everyone to be able to get in this position, but we have to be mobile throughout all our joints and be able to handle those extreme ranges of motion. To one, be able to make the save because that's super important. But two, we want to stay injury free. So if you're mobile and you can move efficiently, that injury occurrence rate is going to go down. So the key areas to focus on for mobility number one, starting at the ground, is going to be the ankles. Then you have the hips, the thoracic spine, which runs from the bottom of the cervical or neck vertebrae all the way to the top of the lumbar vertebrae. And then we have the shoulders to wrap up kind of the final area to focus in on. So mobility movements for the ankles, these are two great exercises that I like to include. Both emphasize both flexion of the ankles and extension. So you see in the lateral lunge, there's a large degree of flexion in my left ankle here, and my right one is in full extension. So for the deep lunge, I recommend you starting out, especially if you have tight ankles, is start this movement out by placing your foot on top of a box. This is going to bring you closer to your body, so you're getting more flexion, and it increases the level of stability for the exercise compared if you just had that foot on the ground. It's a little bit harder to stabilize, and then you also have to get into more flexion in order to achieve that same ankle position here. So you want to start out full extension with both ankles here, and then you're going to slowly push your hips towards the box and then drive that knee over the toes. And what that's going to do is that's going to place us into a large degree of ankle dorsiflexion. So there's a reduced angle between the toes and that tibia. And then you want to hold this position for about 3 to 5 seconds, just so you can feel that end range of motion and kind of push yourself deeper in flexion. And then you'll come up to the starting position. And for this, I recommend anywhere between 8 and 10 reps is a good range to stay in for this. And then we have the lateral lunge for the other mobility exercise for the ankles. This is also a great hip mobility exercise as well, because you're getting a large degree of hip flexion and extension. So for this, you want to set up as pretty much wide as you can tolerate for this. Right here, I'm about 2 hip widths outside my normal stance, and then I go down into a full squat, so my thighs are parallel to the ground. And from here, what I want to do is I want to shift side to side, getting into that deep flexion on one side and getting full extension on the other side. So important to note, when you perform this movement, try to keep the base of your foot connected to the ground as you move into flexion on the other side, because then we're really emphasizing that plantar flexion or extension of the ankle joint. All right, for the hips, this is considered like my gold standard movement for hip mobility, because it targets all the movement patterns that the hip performs. So the hip is a ball and socket joint, so it can move in various degrees of motion. So you have your flexion, your extension, your external, internal rotation, as well as abduction and adduction, which is moving things either further from the midline of the body, or adduction, which is adding that limb closer to the midline. So with hip cars, the way you want to set this up is you want to have something that you can brace against. So for this, I performed it against a rack. And what that's going to do is that's going to limit any compensational movement throughout the rest of the body as you're going about it. So if I was just standing straight up and I had poor hip mobility and I went to this action, so abducting my leg from the body, I could compensate by twisting my upper body or the opposite hip. So make sure you're braced up against something like a door frame or a rack. So for this, you're going to start with your leg crossed over your stance leg here. You're going to go into hip flexion, and then you're going to internally rotate the hip, which will make the tibia go perpendicular to the ground. Then at this point, you abduct, so bring that leg further away from the midline of the body. From here, you're going to, again, internally rotate the hip, which is going to make the balls of your feet go towards the back wall. And then from here, you extend out into the final position of the movement. So once you're here, you're going to go back and you're going to perform all those movements in an opposite fashion. So instead of hip internal rotation at these points, you're going to get a degree of external rotation. So we're hitting all the movement patterns of the hip joint. Right. Next up, we have the T-spine. So again, the T-spine is what runs from the bottom of the cervical vertebrae all the way to the lumbar vertebrae. So it's the mid portion of the back. And we want to keep this mobile as goalies number one, because we are overhead athletes. And when you go and you throw a ball, so like a quarterback or a pitcher, when they go to rotate with the upper body, a lot of what's driving that upper body rotation is the muscles and the mobility within the T-spine. So keeping that mobile is super important as overhead athletes in general, but as goalies as well, because we do rotate a lot, especially when we're making off hip saves, for example. We have to rotate through the mid back in order to make that save. And you'll find a lot of the times, if you do have poor mobility through the thoracic spine, the lower back muscles are going to take the brunt of that movement, and that's when you're going to get some low back pain, especially in the QL. So if you are stiff throughout the thoracic spine, muscles in the lower back are going to take over, and that's going to lead to some tweaks within the back, which we want to avoid because we want to stay healthy year round in order to perform our best. So looking at it from an exercise selection standpoint, we have the banded row with a reach. This is going to be a great exercise because it places us into a large degree of rotation with the upper body. So you'll start with a band extended out on one arm, and the opposite arm is going to be reaching towards that back pocket. Now, as you row with your right arm here, you're going to extend and try to reach towards the wall that's in front of you with the tips of your fingers of that opposite arm. So we're getting that large degree of rotation with the upper body here. It's important to note too, when you perform this movement, make sure you're in a quarter squat position. This is just going to, again, limit any compensation by the lower body to rotate while you perform this movement. So if you're standing straight up, the lower body muscles might compensate and rotate out, but since they are stabilizing that quarter squat position, they aren't as able to, rotate as much, and we're keeping the emphasis on the thoracic spine. All right, and then the next exercise that I wanted to bring up is the incline bench reach. So if you're familiar with the pigeon pose in yoga, you're set up much like that. So your shin is parallel to the bench here, and your opposite arm reaches across your shin, and then we're rotating up through the mid back and trying to reach for the ceiling. Much like the ankle mobility exercises, you want to hold this end range of motion for anywhere between 3 and 5 seconds, just so you can push yourself further into that range of motion as you go through the exercise. And again, hold it 3 to 5 seconds, and anywhere between 8 and 10 reps per side is sufficient for this movement. So the last area of focus for mobility is going to be the shoulders. So the shoulders are what are supporting our arms when we're in our goalie stance and our hands are up. The shoulders drive the movement when we go and we drive our arms towards the ball, and then also when we're making outlet passes. So what we're focused on with the first movement, the prone shoulder external rotation, is this movement that the shoulder goes about, that external rotation, as we're going to make an outlet pass. So my favorite exercise for external rotation of the shoulder is this prone movement, because it fixes our elbow and shoulder on the ground. So there is no compensation for the movement. So it's strictly external rotation. So in this, I have a cone set up, which I rotate around. So I'll start inside the cone. I'll hold something in my hands just so I'm not compensating with my wrist for that rotation. So I'll hold like a tennis ball or a lacrosse ball, and then I'll come up into external rotation, move it to the outside of the cone, and then I'll return back. And then for this exercise, anywhere between 5 and 10 reps should be good for that. If you've never performed an exercise like this for the shoulder, I recommend staying on the lower side of that rep count, just because you will be pretty sore the next day after doing this for the first time, because you're working those kind of finer, smaller stabilizing muscles within the shoulder. And then much like the hip cars, we have shoulder cars, which hit every movement pattern of the shoulder. So you're going to start out with your palm forward, your arm straight to the side, and you're going to bring it up overhead. Once you're here, you're going to want to rotate your palm towards the outside and towards the back of the room, and then sweep it behind the body like that. And then you want to return to the starting position by extending once again, rotating your palm towards the back of the room on the way back, and then bringing it to the starting position. And then for that, anywhere between 8 and 10 reps is going to be great for increasing our shoulder mobility. And that's a movement that I incorporate in the warm-up of every one of my sessions. So it's a great shoulder movement just because it's moving that joint and getting that joint capsule ready for any shoulder pressing movements that day, but it's also hitting every range of motion that the shoulder gets into. All right, moving on to some more fun stuff. So strength for goalies, we'll talk about some of the benefits of strength work, what kind of standards of strength, so what level of strength you should be at, and then we'll break down some of the best exercises for goalies. So benefits of strength work. So number one, it's going to target that mobility. So we're getting into deep ranges of motion under external load. So it's going to, increase your mobility by performing that strength work. And then we have the benefit of injury reduction because we are training ourselves under external load. In those end ranges of motion, we're going to be able to support our joints, our tendons, and our ligaments with strong muscles surrounding those joints. So again, like the knees, if we want to train for strength with the knees, we would do a rear elevated split squat. We're also getting the added benefit of injury reduction because we're making that joint more stable. And then finally, we have movement efficiency. So as goalies, we want to be as efficient in the cage as possible in order to make the save in the most efficient manner as we can. So strength work builds up connections between the brain and the working muscles. So as you work through strength exercises, you're developing that mind-muscle connection. So then when you go into the cage, those movements become more efficient because you've trained them in the weight room and you've trained under external load, various reps throughout the week. So the movements become easier as you train them directly for strength work. All right. So then looking at how strong you should get, this is a chart that you can find online with just minimum goal and exceptional standards of strength. So I like this chart because it provides all the basic movement patterns. So we have the squat, the upper body press, upper body pull, and then a hinge. So going off of this chart with the minimum goal weight, this should be achieved within like your first 1 to 2 years of training. So if you're just getting started in the weight room or, you're anywhere between a 7th grader, freshman, sophomore in high school, don't get too caught up with these numbers. Focus on getting the movement patterns down, focus on your mobility, reaching those end ranges of motion before you get too caught up in the numbers games of things. But if you're a high schooler, you're getting ready to go to college, or you're in college, this is when we should be working towards these minimum and goal weights. The exceptional weights, that's going to come if you're training directly for like powerlifting, or you've been training for anywhere 3 to 5 years plus. That's when you're going to get that exceptional weight. So if you're in high school or getting ready to go into university, definitely double check to see if you're at these minimum or goal weights for strength work. But again, if you're a younger goalie, don't get too caught up in these numbers. Just focus on moving efficiently through those external load patterns, and then focus on your mobility as well. So strength guidelines for goalies, again, we want to emphasize movement patterns that we perform in the cage. So that would be, upper body pressing, that's extension of the hips, the knees, and the ankles. So we want to choose exercises in the weight room that replicate those movements. And for the intensity, so intensity includes things like reps, sets, rest times, and then the percent of external load that you're lifting. Most likely this is going to be presented as a percent of your 1 rep max. So going through the intensity spectrum here. So for reps, for strength work, you want to keep it between 1 and 6 reps. Sets anywhere between 3 and 7. Rest time is going to be ranging from 2 to 5 minutes. And then the percent of your 1 rep max is going to be 80 to 95%. So most likely what you'll see, most strength work takes place between the 80 to 90% 1 rep max load, with anywhere between 1 and 6 reps. So what you don't want to do is stick around this 95% number every training session. So you don't want to be working at maximal all-out capacity day in and day out, because then you're just going to get diminished returns from that. So your performance in cage is going to decline because you are so fatigued, and there would be a higher incident of injury because your central nervous system and all your muscles are so shot from performing that maximal load for too long. So most of the time, what you'll want to stay in between is that 80 to 90% of your 1 rep max. Let's see. So simple progression based off of this. I just included a simple 7-week progression. Now, obviously, there's a lot of other ways you can progress this. You can change the amount of sets that you're doing. You can manipulate the reps a little bit more. But if you're just starting out in the weight room, or you've only been training for 1 to 3 years, following this kind of progression is going to be sufficient enough to drive adaptations that we want. So week 1 is always a testing week when I program. So we'll test anywhere between your 3 and 5 rep max for an exercise. And from there, we can get our estimated 1 rep max through a calculation that we perform. And that 1 rep max is what we're going to base the training load off of for the rest of our programming. And then week 2, you're going to acclimate to new movements. So we're not up into the strength percent yet. We will wait until week 4 to really begin working on that strength movement, because we want to get used to those new movements. So week 4, you'd be at 3 sets of 6 for 75 to 80%, anywhere in between. And then towards the end of the cycle is when you're going to be at that near maximal capacity. So you're doing low reps, low sets at about 85 to 90% of your 1 rep max. And then from here, going even further into a program, week 8 could either be a deload week. So you're dropping this percent and dropping the reps down by about 50%. So you're giving your body a chance to actively recover. Or you could go and again, test your 3 rep max, and hopefully your load increase by about 5 to 10 pounds for that movement. All right, and then breaking down some of the best exercises for strength. For the lower body, the movement pattern we're focused on with the hip thrust is hip extension, so really targeting the glute muscles. Then we have split squats, which are again a great option for strength, mobility, and that degree of stability that we want to get, because we want to prevent those injuries from being unstable. So split squats are a great option for that as well. Step ups are another great option, especially if you have problems getting into hip flexion, because when you go and step up on the box, you're going to have to flex your hip and drive your knee up a little bit higher than you would a normal split squat. Then we have lunges. I didn't write down forward, lateral, or backwards lunges, because I like to explore different degrees of lunging when I program for athletes. So if you can imagine in the cage, when you go and you step towards the ball, you're not always stepping directly to the side. You're not always stepping directly forward. So we want to work that in our training. We want to work at various degrees of lunges as we go about them. So within a training session, this could look like, okay, I'm going to give you the option to lunge out either between 12 o'clock, so directly in front of you, or 3 o'clock. So you have 4 reps programmed into the set. You can't lunge out in the same fashion that you did every time. So if you step to the side the first rep, you have to go to like 1 o'clock the next rep. So this translates in the cage again, because we're not stepping at the same exact angle every time. So we want to train to get ready for that in the weight room. And then wrapping up the lower body, we have Nordic curls, which I touched on earlier. So that's going to, again, develop that eccentric hamstring strength. For the upper body, dumbbell bench or any alternating variation of that is recommended. I recommend the dumbbells over the barbell, because the dumbbells will stress out the shoulder joint a little bit less. So when you're going and you're using a barbell, it's placing you a large degree of external rotation already with the shoulder. So that's going to keep it, a little bit challenging to keep your elbows in tight close to the body. So the dumbbells are a great option for that. And we also get the benefit of having to stabilize with our torso through that movement if we're going for that single arm variation. Pull-ups are another great inclusion. Even though we don't perform a movement pattern of a pull-up in the game, unless your goalie celebration is to knock out some pull-ups on the crossbar, you're not going to be performing that movement very often. But again, as athletes, we want to have a well-rounded supporting muscle groups for our joints. We want to be well-rounded. So our anterior muscles can't be way stronger than our back muscles, because we have to support that shoulder joint. So pull-ups or any sort of chin-up variation is going to suffice for that. And then we have the landmine press, which we'll have a picture of in the power section. This is a great pressing movement to perform as goalies, because much like the lunges, we're getting that added benefit of working at various degrees of motion. So with a landmine press, you'll have a barbell anchored out into like a free moving position. So you can press to the side out here, you can press directly up, or you can go across your body and replicate that movement pattern, much like you'll see when we're making like an off stick side high save. You can press that barbell across the body in that similar fashion. Wrapping it up, we have full body exercises. So the push press, again, that's going to emphasize that triple extension through the lower body. So the ankles are extending out, the knees are extending, as well as the hips. And then you're going to get the added benefit of that extension at the shoulder joint, which we go through when we're going and driving our hands towards a shot. The unsupported rows, again, we want to support the shoulder by having the back muscles be strong as well as the anterior muscles. So unsupported rows are great for supporting the shoulder capsule, but they're also going to give you the benefit of recruiting the abdominals to stabilize the movement. So if you're bent over in a hinge position and you're rowing one dumbbell up, your body is fighting that urge to rotate with that dumbbell. And then when you're going back down, it's resisting the urge to rotate the opposite way. So it's going to recruit those core muscles and really build that up. So when we're in cage, our core is actually working with us. So when we go and we make a crossbody save, so we don't rotate away from the shot, we have to slow down that rotation with our core so we stay square to the shooter. And then wrapping it up, we have farmer carries. This is a great core exercise again. So for this, you'll perform farmer carries by walking down the turf, and you'll have two heavy dumbbells on your sides. So again, you're getting the added benefit of postural control, and then you're also getting a degree of eccentric strength being built up in the bicep, because it's going to be at a very stretched position in the farmer carry. And when we're going in, we're driving our arms towards a shot, that bicep, much like the hamstrings or the adductor longus, is being stretched out rapidly. So we want to be able to prevent any injury to the bicep as well by strengthening that up with a farmer's carry. All right. So now we have power, which I consider the key to goalie performance. So this is the part of the presentation I was most excited for, because I feel like if you do have a good baseline of mobility and strength built up, power is what's really going to drive your performance and up that save percentage within the cage from a weight room standpoint. So looking at power training is all about moving weight and moving it quickly. So power training is going to develop your fast twitch or your type 2 muscle fibers. And as goalies, that's going to be the dominant muscle fiber that we use within the cage, because we are acting in an explosive manner when we're going and making a shot or a save towards a shot. So the development of type 2 muscle fibers is what we're focused on with power training. There's about 8 different varieties of power training, but when we're focused on goalies, we're going to be focused on plyometrics, ballistic training, and dynamic effort power training. So plyometrics for goalies. So plyometrics utilize the stretch shortening cycle. So it's the elastic component of your muscles and ligaments. So stretch shortening cycle, it's basically a fast stretch of a muscle, fast eccentric followed by a quick concentric. So jump ropes are a good example of this, because you're lengthening the muscle when you make contact with the ground. And then in order to go back up and jump over the rope, you have to quickly concentrically contract that muscle. So benefits for goalies with plyometrics, you're getting that added benefit of getting resistance to those ground reaction forces that I mentioned earlier. So if you're performing something like a single leg broad jump pictured here, you're absorbing a ton of force through the ankles, knees, and hips as you are landing from that broad jump. So some key plyometrics for goalies are going to be 1, jump ropes. That's kind of the lowest intensity that you can opt for. You have the options to do broad jumps, or hurdle hops are also a good implementation. Now, in order to progress plyometrics, you can add a degree of instability. So instead of landing with both legs on a broad jump, you can opt for a single leg landing variation. Next up, we have ballistic training. Ballistic training is similar to plyometric training where we're being more elastic, but we're taking away that eccentric component of the movement. So as goalies in the cage, we don't have the benefit to standing straight up. And then once a shot happens, we're able to drop down and utilize the stretch shortening cycle in order to produce force. We're most often starting in a static position within our stance. So that's replicated with the two exercises I have pictured here. So the first one is a scoop toss. So you'll start in a similar position with your hips that you would be in cage. So if you opt for a lower stance, you would more likely be in a full squat position here. But if your stance is a little bit higher up, you can opt for a quarter squat. So with this, what you're going to do, you're going to set up with your hands below a med ball. You're going to be in this squat position, and then you're going to rapidly extend throughout your body. So from the ankles all the way to the shoulders, and throw and launch that ball overhead into the air. So we're getting that added benefit of starting in a static position, and then we're getting that triple extension through the ankles, knees, and hips. Another great exercise for ballistic training is going to be a rotational shot put throw. So again, we're starting in that static position, much like we'd be in the cage. And we're actually going to utilize the T-spine in this movement to further rotate sideways with the ball and propel it towards the wall. So you're going to set up in your stance position. If in this position, I have my right hand set up like a shot put, person would have their hand on the ball. So the ball is right here and my hand is bracing towards the back of it. And then I'm just supporting it with the opposite arm. And from here, I'm going to rotate my hips and my T-spine and quickly extend through my arm in order to propel the ball towards the wall. And then make sure when you're performing this movement, you perform it on both sides so there's not a deficit in between both your arms. All right. Wrapping up the forms of power training, we have dynamic effort. So this is very similar to strength training movements. So there's a great degree of crossover. Like I mentioned previously, we have the landmine press for strength work. We can also use that in dynamic effort work. And then same thing, we have a trap bar deadlift here. Great strength exercise, but it is also a great power exercise as well. So what's going to separate strength and dynamic work for power specifically is going to be the intent of the movement and the intensity that you're performing the movement at. So the intensity for this is going to be 40 to 70% of your 1 rep max, whereas for strength training, you want to be at that 80 to 95%. So we're focused on with dynamic effort, moving that barbell or moving those dumbbells as quickly as we can. So this is a great variation of the trap bar deadlift for goalies here for power training, because we're emphasizing extension through one leg, much like we'd be doing when we're going and stepping towards a shot. That back leg is extending, and that's what we're pushing off of in order to propel us towards the ball. So for this, you'll set up with all your weight on that left leg here, or your right leg, whatever one is forward. And that back leg is just going to be up on the toes, and you're just going to be performing kind of like a kickstand of a bike. So that's just barely supporting our weight on the side. Most of our weight is going to be on this left foot, however. And then you're just going to keep your back in alignment here, and you're just going to press into the ground as quickly as possible to propel that trap bar up in the air. And then over here, we have the example of the landmine press. I like the landmine again because we can add that various degrees of motion. So we can do a stick side high save, or we can rotate across our body and replicate like an off hip save as well. Okay. Oh, and then a little bonus recommendation for power training. So before, we had previously talked about yielding isometrics for tendonitis within the knee. This is the opposite form of isometrics. It's called overcoming isos. So overcoming isometrics are pushing against an immovable object. So for example, we have here, this rack is bolted down to the ground, and I'm pressing a barbell up into these safety pins. So what this is doing is I'm creating as much force, recruiting a lot of motor units from the muscle and pushing into those safety pins. So there's a lot of benefits when it comes to overcoming isos. For one, you're pushing against something that's immovable. So you're developing a lot of force in order to do this. And that's going to translate to more power when we're going and stepping towards a shot in cage. You're also going to get a lot of good tendon benefits with overcoming ISOs. So again, it's going to relieve some of that pain that you're feeling from tendonitis, but you're also making the tendons stiffer. So when the tendons are stiffer, they're going to be able to produce force more efficiently and produce more force, but they're also going to be able to absorb force more efficiently. So when we're looking at ankle injuries, especially a rupture of the Achilles tendon, if we can use an exercise such as this to strengthen and put a lot of force on that tendon and make it stiffer, it's going to become more resilient to those ground reaction forces when we are in cage and when we're stepping towards a shot. And then the last benefit of isometrics is it can almost make you stronger for your strength work. So if you include something like a split squat overcoming isometric before, let's say, a squat session, your muscles are going to be more apt to recruit all the muscle fibers within that muscle. So what it does is it shifts the force velocity curve over to the right. So when you perform an overcoming isometric before a strength movement, this line is going to shift more to the right. So you're going to have more force output at a higher velocity. So when we're speaking in terms of developing power, the more load we can use, the more adaptions we're going to get from that. And we're going to get that quicker adaptation of power when we're able to move the bar at a quicker velocity. So overcoming isometrics potentiates the muscles for that strength movement. So overcoming isometrics will recruit all the muscle fibers and all the motor units for that muscle. So when you go and perform strength work, all of those motor units are already firing. So you're going to be able to move more load and you're going to move it quicker. Now, I know this is kind of like a confusing graph. I saw you, Damon. Were you trying to figure out?
Yeah, I was trying to piece it together.
Yeah, so we'll walk through that here. So on one axis, you have force, and then velocity is going to be on that x-axis here. So if we start out on this side, this is going to be your force velocity curve for max strength work. So when we're speaking in terms of moving like a 1 repetition bench press, the velocity of that movement due to the percentage of load that you're using for that movement is very high. So that velocity is going to be very low because you can't move, 315 pounds super fast unless you're like a, D1 Georgia lineman recruit. But as you lessen the amount of force that is required for that movement, the velocity is going to be quicker. So then when you implement those overcoming isometrics before, you're recruiting a large number of motor units. So your muscles are going to be able to handle a higher velocity with more force being placed upon it. So instead of this kind of J curve starting here, after overcoming isometrics, it could be anywhere over here. So you're producing a large amount of force, but then you're getting a little bit more velocity than you would previously.
Sweet.
Yep. All right. And then another thing, don't forget the sprint. As goalies, I know a lot of like the high school kids I work with out in Arizona, they're like, oh, why should I run? I'm not on the field running around, but sprinting is a great power exercise to develop explosiveness. It's also a great stability exercise because you're moving at such a quick velocity and you're putting a lot of force into the ground. Your muscles have to stabilize a lot to keep your body in a good alignment to accelerate. So when we're chasing a ball, you have to be able to accelerate quickly, to get that extra possession. And in the age of the college shot clock, possession is very important. So it's important to be able to win those kind of foot race battles to the end line. All right. And then I wanted to include, this is a great resource for you guys, just a sample 3-day-a-week program. I won't talk through all these points because that could take quite some time, could bore some people. But simply structuring a workout, I like to use full body splits because as athletes, we are utilizing our full body whenever we're in the cage. We're not just going to be doing, a bodybuilding arm day because that doesn't translate to our performance. So full body allows us to move our full body in conjunction and kind of train to be well-rounded athletes. So you always want to put your most demanding movements either first in the full day movement, or if you're doing a kind of tri-set 2-block system like I am, put it at that first exercise in each block. So you see front squat is first on Monday, and then we have the alternating dumbbell bench, which is second. So prioritize your strength and power work and then add that assistance. So does anyone have any questions on the kind of sample program?
I think we're good on the program. Take a screenshot.
Yep, take a screenshot if you want.
Just grab a screenshot. Awesome. Yeah. We got some other questions. I know we're running a little bit late, so if you guys are a little bit over time, so if you guys got to go, no problem at all. Do you want to dig into those, or we got a couple more?
I just included, so if you guys want to screenshot this as well, this is a prep movement. So real quick, keep your prep to about 10 to 15 movements. Add in some light aerobic work just to get the body warmed up for the day. Again, add the hip cars and shoulder cars each day. Just keep those joints moving healthy. And then this is a great time to add a degree of exploration. It's like I mentioned with the lunges before, we're not always moving in these same movement patterns, especially as goalies, we get in some pretty awkward positions. So adding in multi-directional lunges or exploring different ways to crawl around the turf is going to be important. And then also focus on the, skipping ahead here. Focus on the movement pattern you're going to be performing for the day. So an example of this for the core work, the end core work prep, we have a Turkish get up that requires a lot of shoulder stability. And I put that for Wednesday because on Wednesday's main lift for the shoulders, it's a landmine press. So when you're working in your prep, make sure you're focusing on the movement patterns that you're going to be performing later in that session.
Nice. All right.
Yep. And then here's some other quick resources for you guys if you want to take a picture. These are some of my favorite coaches on Instagram, and then a couple good books and podcasts for you guys as well. Awesome. And then this one up here is actually the online company I just started. So there's a lot of goalie specific stuff up there already, and I'm continually posting weekly some good goalie training weight room videos and pictures for that.
Awesome. I just dropped that in the chat. Give that a follow and keep tagging me on there. I'll share those posts.
Yeah.
Get the charger going on. All right.
So.
Yeah. Well, what'd you guys think? Thank you. That was some amazing information. So complete, so thorough. That was awesome. Like a full masterclass in workout science of what you guys should be doing.
Yeah, I could have gone off on like a million tangents there, so I had to.
No, all good. Yeah, I mean, it's great. It's great. So, what do you guys think? Show some love in the chat. Awesome. Thank you. Real got the approval hands emoji. Thanks. Yeah, awesome. So we have a couple questions. Let's see how many we can get to. One of the questions, and I actually had this question as well. Benny was new to the weight room and was asking about the foam padding thing for the squats. What's your thoughts on that? Should we use that? Should we not use that? Does it matter? Does it not matter?
So I mean, at some point you will have to like put a bar on your back. So the foam pad, if you have some sort of discomfort there, or, you get a bad sunburn, definitely put the pad on the bar. But when we go and set up, I wish I had like a bar in here or something. When we go and set up for the back squat, we really want to make sure that bar is resting directly on the upper back muscles. So if possible, try to get rid of that pad as soon as possible, because when we want to set up and we want to create tension within the upper back and the lats when we're setting up for the back squat, we want to be able to kind of shrug up with our shoulders and create a shelf with our back muscles. So we want that bar to be sitting right on those muscles. So if you can go without the foam pad, definitely do that. But if it is that uncomfortable to perform with a bar on your back, go for something like a goblet squat or a split squat hold with a med ball.
Awesome. Tracy says, I'm in the weight room for football, so I would love to know how to train for goalie. I mean, we pretty much went through it, and I imagine a lot of the movements are going to be somewhat similar because you need.
Yeah, there's a large degree of crossover. So At the facility I previously trained at last summer, I was training a lot of the Arizona Cardinal and ASU football players, and a lot of the guys that I took over were the linemen. And as I was going through their sessions and I was programming for them, I actually saw the crossover between that position in football and lacrosse goalies because for the most part they're starting in a static position on the line, move, and then it's that quick either if they're going for a pass block, they're stepping laterally explosive in order to block someone from getting or the quarterback. Or if they're run blocking, they're going out forward. So if you're more of like a forward stepper in the cage, that's the same thing as a lineman going out and run blocking. So there's a large degree of crossover between football and lacrosse training. I would say if you're on a good program for football, add in some of the mobility exercises for goalies. But since there is a great degree of crossover between the movement patterns, yeah, it should work out the train for both kind of conjunctively.
Yeah, love it. Awesome. I think this question was before we got into plyometrics, but the question is, what do you think about plyometrics and how should we implement them? Oh wait, where'd it go? Someone jumped in.
Yeah,
How should we implement them into a workout plan? So we sort of covered that one already. I don't know if you want to add anything on that.
Yeah, so I can add in. So with plyometrics, especially when I am in like a power phase of a workout program, I'm more focused on the dynamic effort movements and the ballistic movements, but I also want to include plyometrics into those sessions. So the way I did it, if you see, if I can go back to that sample program, if it lets me, maybe I'll see this. So I actually included the plyometrics within the prep phase because it is relatively low intensity movements compared to ballistic or dynamic effort power training. Putting them in the prep kind of prepares the body for those more demanding movements. But I love plyometrics. I mean, every sort of athlete, even general population people that I train at the gym, I include plyometrics because it just keeps the body moving free and efficiently and builds up the tolerance and strengthens the ligaments and tendons. So yeah, love plyometrics. Definitely include them into your workouts.
Beautiful. Could you go? Someone wanted to go back to the groin stretch slide real quick because I said if you do a photo of yourself in this position, you get 3 entries. And by the way, put that in when you email help@laxgoalierat. Said Coach Dan, because my team is right here. This is the one. My team is going to help with those entries. So say Coach Damon said we got 3 entries on this one. So there you go. There you go.
Yeah, this is a tough one for anyone that tried it. You definitely feel it right away.
I love it. Cool. I don't know if we can get to the rest of the questions. Let's just do one more. Gavin says, what are the best exercises for driving to the most when making a save? I imagine he's talking about explosion in the save. So sometimes in games, I read the shot correctly, but my step isn't fast enough to make the save. Same here, says Holly.
Yeah, sweet. So going back to some exercise for that. Number one, sprinting is going to be key for that because you're, compounding those movements and you're recruiting a large number of muscle fibers to be able to sprint at a max capacity. So that's going to build up kind of your rhythm within your lower body too. So sprinting is a great exercise. Let's see, going back to, so this is a great plyometric to include. So it's a broad jump. So you're going to start with your arms and knees fully extended. You're going to drop your hips down and then jump out horizontally, project yourself down the turf. But the one that's going to benefit the most from your stance standpoint is going to be this scoop toss with the med ball. So you again set up in that static position and you're getting that triple extension. One other great exercise that I didn't include would be a landmine press to step. So you set up in like a lunge variation where your back foot or back knee is on the ground, and as you press with the landmine, you're actually stepping forward. So that's another great exercise as well. And if you go to the LTD Performance Instagram, there's, I think I just posted it last week, there's about 5 or 6 examples of power movements in order to increase your step. So
beautiful. Coach, thank you so much. That was amazing. Again, show some love in the chat. I just dropped the Instagram in there. Give Coach John a follow. Awesome. Very well done. that'll do it. Thank you so much, Coach. Any final last words?
No, just thanks for joining. I hope everyone has a great rest of their week with this conference. It's amazing to see all the different speakers and, especially young goalies soak up as much information as you can. When I was just starting out as a goalie, I didn't have all this. So definitely take in the appreciation for it and everything Coach Damon's doing for you guys.
Well, I appreciate that. We'll be back tomorrow. 4 more sessions. We'll see you guys. Take care.
Bye.